Hey everyone, and welcome back to Too Lazy to Read.
Glad to be here.
We break down big ideas from insightful books, especially for busy folks like you who are ready to level up their lives.
That's us.
Today's deep dive is into Dopamine Nation, Finding Balance in the Age of Indulgence
Oh, interesting.
by Dr. Anna Lembke.
I've heard of her.
She's a Stanford psychiatrist who specializes in addiction, and this book is a real eye-opener.
I bet.
If you think you're not an addict, think again.
Oh.
This book will make you look at pleasure and pain and how our brains get hooked in a whole new light.
I'm intrigued already.
It's so relevant, especially for young people today, because we're bombarded with opportunities for instant gratification.
Yeah, it's true. It's everywhere you look.
From social media to streaming to online shopping, it's nonstop.
And it's so easy to get sucked in.
Dr. Lemke doesn't just tell us to put down the phone.
Thank goodness.
She digs into the neuroscience of why it's so hard
I'm all ears.
and offers real strategies for taking back control.
That's what we need.
So let's unpack this.
Okay.
What's the core problem that Dr. Lemke lays out in Dopamine Nation?
Well, she argues that we're living in a world of, you guessed it, pleasure overload.
Makes sense.
Think about it. You can get almost anything you want.
Anything.
Well, almost anything, anytime you want,
Right,
with
well.
a few clicks on your phone. That is
You got me there.
food, entertainment, connection.
Even connection.
Especially connection. It's all right there at your fingertips.
Wow.
And while that sounds, pretty great on the surface, it's actually messing with our brains.
You did so.
In some pretty, profound ways.
Interesting.
That's where her simple seesaw analogy comes in.
Oh, tell me more about that.
She calls it the pleasure-pain balance.
Pleasure-pain balance.
Just imagine a seesaw with pleasure on one side and pain on the other.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Every time we experience a surge of pleasure,
Like what?
like finishing a level in a video game or getting a bunch of likes on a post, well, that seesaw tips to the pleasure side. But here's the thing. Our brains are wired to seek equilibrium.
So what happens?
So to balance things out, it tips back down towards the pain side.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That explains why that high from a win or achieving something doesn't last very long.
Yep, exactly.
So how does this connect to addiction?
Well, this is where Dr. Lemke's insights get, really sharp.
Okay.
She says that in this world of constant stimulation, we're essentially overdosing on pleasure.
Overdosing on pleasure.
And our brains, they adapt.
How's
We need more and more to get that same effect.
And
And the
that's
come
how-
down into pain, well, it becomes stronger.
Oh, I see.
This makes us crave that next dopamine hit even more intensely.
Gotcha.
And that, my friend, is the cycle of addiction.
Wow, so it can be anything.
Whether it's to a substance, a behavior, or even a feeling.
So we're all kind of walking a tightrope in Dopamine Nation,
That's one way to put it.
even if we don't think we have a full-blown addiction.
You got it.
But how do we get off this crazy ride?
That's where the book gets really practical.
Love it when that happens.
Dr. Lemke walks us through her, wait for it, dopamine framework.
Okay.
And it's not just the brain chemical, dopamine.
What is it then?
It's an acronym for a set of tools to reclaim your balance.
Ooh, I love a good acronym.
Me too.
So what does dopamine stand for?
Each letter represents a step.
Go on.
Data, overdose, pain, abstinence, mindfulness, insight, next steps, and experiment.
Okay, there's a lot to
It's
it.
a pretty holistic approach,
Is it?
addressing everything from understanding the science
This
to putting those concrete strategies into action.
I like it. All right, starting with D, for data, what kind of data do we need to be aware of?
It's all about understanding how our brains actually get hooked on pleasure. The nitty-gritty.
Okay.
You'll dive into concepts like tolerance.
What?
You need more of something to get the same effect.
Right, like needing more coffee to wake up.
You got it. And then there's neuroadaptation.
Neuro what?
Neuroadaptation, which is how our brains, they rewire themselves based on our habits. Pretty fascinating stuff.
Okay.
And how our pleasure set points,
Pleasure set point.
what feels normal to us, can get thrown way off balance in a world of constant stimulation.
It's like our brains get used to the constant high.
You got it.
Okay, that makes sense.
On to O for overdose.
Overdose.
What's fascinating here is that Dr. Lemke suggests that we can overdose on pleasure even from things we consider harmless.
I wouldn't have thought that.
Right. It's not just about, drugs or alcohol.
Give me an example.
Think about binge watching Netflix for hours.
Oh yeah, guilty as charged.
For scrolling through social media until your eyes hurt.
In there.
Or even working obsessively.
Even working.
Yep. These can all be forms of pleasure overdoses that throw our dopamine systems out of whack.
So it's not just about what we're doing,
Right.
but how much age we're doing it.
Exactly. And that's a key distinction.
This is where it gets kind of paradoxical, right?
Oh, tell me more.
Because the next step in the framework is P for pain.
Ah, yes, the paradox of pain.
You're telling me pain is a good thing.
Hear me out.
How does that work?
Well, think about it. Have you ever felt that amazing rush after a tough workout?
I do feel good after.
Or that feeling of accomplishment after completing a difficult task?
Yeah, like a sense of pride.
Or even that, invigorating feeling after a cold shower?
Not a fan of cold showers.
Fair enough. But those are all examples of healthy pain.
Healthy pain, okay.
That can help recalibrate our pleasure-pain balance.
So it's like our brains need a little bit of a challenge.
Exactly.
A little bit of discomfort to appreciate the good stuff even more.
You're getting it.
So it's not about avoiding pain altogether.
Right.
It's about choosing the right kind of pain, the kind that makes us stronger.
Now you're talking. And those experiences of pushing through discomfort, they can actually trigger dopamine release too.
Wait, really?
Which helps us build resilience and makes us less afraid of facing challenges in the future.
That's pretty cool.
Dr. Lembke illustrates this with some amazing patient stories.
Ooh, I love a good story. Give me an example.
Okay, one that really stuck with me was about Jacob, who struggled with sex addiction.
His entire life.
Yeah, pretty much his entire life. The story starts when he's just a teenager.
A teenager?
Confessing to a priest, get this, that he masturbates every day.
Oh, wow.
And the priest's advice.
Don't tell me don't do it again.
You got it. Don't do it again.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Right. It highlights how willpower alone isn't enough.
Especially when you're battling something as powerful as addiction.
You said it.
So what happened to Jacob?
Well, like most of us, his willpower didn't last very long.
Makes sense.
He ended up creating this, secret life, hiding his behaviors, and going to extreme lengths to chase that dopamine rush.
So even as a young guy, Jacob was already caught in this cycle
This is a classic example.
of craving, indulging, and then needing more to get the same effect.
Exactly, but his story gets even wilder. I'll spare you the details, but trust me, it shows how far we can go to find that dopamine hit.
Maybe we can skip those details.
Probably for the best.
The takeaway is clear.
Definitely.
This dopamine-driven cycle, it can take over.
Absolutely.
Even with something as natural as sex.
And it's not just Jacob. Dr. Lembke talks about a woman who got hooked on, believe it or not, romance novels.
Romance novels?
You heard that right. It started innocently enough, but soon she was neglected to her family.
Oh, no.
And her work, spending all her time lost in these, predictable, formulaic stories.
I love a good romance novel, but I can't imagine it taking over my life like that.
It's a great example of how even seemingly harmless activities can become problematic.
When they hijack our brain's reward system.
Precisely. It's not the romance novels themselves.
Right.
It's the way they were being used, to avoid dealing with real life.
So it's about recognizing the patterns in our own behavior.
That's the key.
Like, am I doing this because it genuinely brings me joy, or am I just chasing that dopamine hit?
That's the question, isn't it? And that brings us to the A in the framework. Abstinence.
Abstinence, okay.
She emphasizes that giving your brain a break from those dopamine-triggering activities.
All of them?
Well, not necessarily all of them. Even for a short period, it can be surprisingly powerful.
Like a reset button.
Like hitting the reset button on your reward system.
So we're talking about a full-on dopamine detox.
Not necessarily. It doesn't have to be that extreme.
So what do you suggest?
Dr. Lembke says even small experiments with abstinence can be really helpful.
Like what?
Maybe it's a day without social media or a week without video games, little things.
Yeah.
The point is to disrupt the cycle and see what you notice.
How about myself?
About your own patterns and cravings.
So it's not about deprivation.
No, not at all.
It's about creating space to understand how these things are affecting us.
That's the idea.
What about M for mindfulness?
Mindfulness. It's a big buzzword these days, but for good reason.
How does it apply here?
Mindfulness is about tuning into your urges, being present with uncomfortable feelings,
Yeah.
and becoming more aware of why you do the things you do, all without judgment.
Easier said than done.
It is. It's a skill that takes practice.
But it's valuable.
But it's incredibly valuable in Dopamine Nation.
So instead of automatically reaching for my phone when I'm bored,
Right.
I should just sit with that boredom.
And see what comes up.
Really, just sit there.
Exactly. It's about noticing your patterns.
And asking myself,
And asking yourself, What am I feeling right now? What's driving this urge? What would happen if I just paused for a moment instead of giving in?
That's tough.
It is, but it gets easier with practice.
So mindfulness is like building a muscle.
I like that analogy.
The more we practice it, the stronger we get at resisting those impulsive urges.
You got it. And that leads perfectly into I for insight.
Insight, okay.
Insight is about truthfully examining your behaviors and motivations.
And that's a key to lasting change.
Often, yes, it's about getting honest with yourself.
Like really honest.
And asking the tough questions.
What kind of questions?
Questions like, why am I really reaching for that bag of chips? Why can't I put my phone down? What need am I trying to fulfill with this behavior?
So insight is about getting to the root of the problem.
Exactly.
Not just treating the symptoms.
We're going deeper here.
It's about understanding the why behind the addiction.
That's the key.
What comes after insight?
What's N for next steps?
The next steps.
Next steps is about figuring out your path forward.
Okay.
It's about taking everything you've learned about yourself
All that self-reflection.
and creating a personalized plan for change.
Does that look different for everyone?
It can. This might involve moderation, abstinence, or finding healthier sources of pleasure.
So there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Nope.
It's about finding what works best for you and your individual needs.
You got it.
What about the final E in the framework? Experiment.
Experimentation is all about putting your plan into action and seeing what happens.
Like trial and error.
It's about trying different approaches, adjusting as you go, and finding strategies that help you achieve balance and live a more fulfilling life. That's the goal.
So it's all about trial and error, learning from our mistakes,
You got it.
and finding what works for us in the long run.
Exactly.
Dr. Lembke is really giving us a roadmap here, a way to navigate Dopamine Nation without getting totally lost in the pleasure overload.
She is. She's like our guide through this crazy world.
But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive,
Yes.
I want to hear more about those patient stories.
Oh, you want to hear more?
You mentioned Max, who cycled through 14 different drugs in just over a decade.
Max's story, it's a powerful one.
What can we learn from his experience?
Well, Max's story is a powerful reminder that addiction can take many forms.
Okay.
And that anyone can be vulnerable. He started with substances that many people consider, gateway drugs.
Like
Alcohol, cigarettes, cannabis.
usual suspects.
Then he moved on to cocaine, prescription opioids, and eventually heroin.
Wow, that escalated quickly.
It's a tragic illustration of how tolerance and the pursuit of, ever-increasing highs can lead down a dangerous path.
And his story underscores the importance of early intervention
Absolutely.
and understanding the warning signs of addiction,
That's key.
whether it's in ourselves or in the people we care about.
We need to be aware.
Dr. Lembke isn't trying to scare us.
No, not at all.
She's trying to equip us with knowledge, give us the tools to make informed choices.
That's right.
Okay, so we've got Jacob, the woman hooked on romance novels, and Max, whose story highlights the dangers of substance abuse.
3 very different stories, but all connected by this underlying theme of dopamine.
Are there any other characters we should know about before we move on?
There's one more that really resonates with me,
Tell me about them.
especially given our focus on, young people striving for self-betterment. It's the story of a young man who was addicted to video games.
Video games, that's a tough one.
He was spending hours upon hours immersed in virtual worlds, neglecting his real-life responsibilities
Oh, no.
and relationships. It's a common problem these days.
I think a lot of us can relate to that, at least to some extent. I know I've definitely gotten sucked into video games and lost track of time.
It happens to the best of us.
What was it about gaming that made it so addictive for him?
It was a combination of factors, really. Video games, they offer this immersive world where you can, escape from reality,
I could see that.
experience a sense of control and achievement, and connect with others online, all in the comfort of your own home. Plus, they're designed to keep you engaged with constant rewards and feedback loops, those little dopamine hits that keep you coming back for more.
It's all very clever.
It is. And all of this, it triggers those dopamine pathways and can make it, really hard to stop.
So it's not just about the dopamine hits.
Right.
It's also about the escape from reality and the feeling of belonging that these games provide.
Exactly. It's a powerful combination.
And that makes it especially important to find balance, make sure our online activities aren't taking over our lives.
Absolutely. We need to set boundaries and make sure we're still engaging with the real world.
That's where Dr. Lembke's insights about self-care come in.
You caught it. She argues that when we're constantly bombarded with easy pleasures, we tend to neglect the activities that that genuinely nourish us.
Things like,
Things like getting enough sleep, eating nutritious food, spending time in nature, connecting with loved ones, and engaging in meaningful work. The basics.
those are all things that take effort, right?
They do. They're not instant gratification.
Like scrolling through social media or playing another level of a game.
Exactly. And that's why they often get pushed aside in our quest for quick dopamine hits.
Makes sense.
But the problem is, neglecting these essential needs, it creates a void
A void.
that we try to fill with, you guessed it, more dopamine-driven activities.
It's a vicious cycle.
It is a never-ending loop of seeking pleasure and avoiding pain.
It's like we're trying to fill a hole in our soul with junk food,
I like that analogy.
and it's just making us feel worse in the long run.
You're getting it. It's about recognizing that true fulfillment comes from nourishing ourselves on a deeper level.
I think that's a powerful metaphor for what's happening in Dopamine Nation.
It's a powerful book, for sure.
But where do we go from here?
That's the big question, isn't it?
How do we start making changes and breaking free from these addictive cycles?
Well, that's where the second part of the book gets really interesting.
Can't wait.
Dr. Lembke dives into specific strategies for finding balance in our dopamine-driven world, and we'll explore those in the next part of our deep dive.
This is all starting to make a lot of sense.
Glad to hear it.
But I have to ask, is there any hope for people who are already caught in the grip of addiction?
I'm sure there is.
Is it possible to break free from that cycle? Is it as simple as just choosing differently?
Well, Dr. Lembke offers a message of hope. She believes that recovery is possible for everyone.
That's good to hear.
But it requires honesty, courage, and a willingness to do the hard work.
It's not easy.
It's not about willpower alone. It's about understanding your triggers, developing coping mechanisms, and building a support system that can help you through the tough times.
That makes sense. It's about having the right tools and support.
Exactly.
But what about the misconceptions surrounding addiction? There are a lot of them out there.
There are, and they can be really harmful.
What are some of those common ones?
Well, one of the biggest misconceptions is that addiction is a moral failing.
Like it's a choice.
Exactly, that people who are addicted are just weak-willed or lacking discipline.
That's so unfair.
It is. And Dr. Lembke challenges this notion, explaining that addiction is a complex brain disease
It's a disease.
that affects our reward pathways. It's not a choice, it's a disease.
That's an important distinction to make.
It is. It helps to remove the stigma and shame that often surround addiction.
So it's not about blaming people.
No, it's about understanding the underlying mechanisms and offering compassion and support, not judgment.
But is abstinence the only way to recover?
That's another common misconception.
Some people say it's the only way.
For some people, yes, abstinence is the best path, but for others, moderation is possible.
So it depends.
It depends on the individual and the substance or behavior involved.
There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Exactly. Dr. Lembke emphasizes that recovery is a personalized journey.
A journey, not a destination.
That's a good way to put it, and there are many paths to recovery.
That's good to know because for some people, the idea of never having a drink or never watching TV again can feel overwhelming and unsustainable.
It can be, and it's important to find an approach that feels right for you.
And Dr. Lembke talks about a range of tools that can be helpful for those in recovery,
Oh yeah, she does.
including therapy, medication, and support groups.
All valuable tools.
It's about finding what works for you.
And committing to the journey of healing one step at a time.
Okay, this is all incredibly insightful.
Glad you're finding it helpful.
But Dr. Lembke is a psychiatrist.
She is one of the best.
Does she talk about the connection between mental health and addiction? Is there an overlap?
Oh, absolutely. She emphasizes that mental health disorders and addiction often go hand in hand.
Like they feed off each other?
Sometimes, yeah, someone with anxiety might turn to alcohol to self-medicate.
To numb the anxiety.
Exactly, or someone with depression might use drugs to numb their feelings.
So they're using substances to cope with their mental health challenges.
It's a common coping mechanism, but unfortunately, it often makes things worse in the long run.
And Dr. Lembke stresses the importance of addressing both the addiction.
And the underlying mental health condition, it's a two-pronged approach.
So treating one without the other might not be very effective.
Exactly. It's about taking a holistic approach to recovery, recognizing that our mental and emotional well-being are deeply intertwined with our behaviors.
It's all connected.
It is. We can't separate our mental health from our physical health, from our behaviors. It's all part of the same system.
Okay, all of this is giving me a lot to think about. What's the overall message that Dr. Lembke wants readers to take away from Dopamine Nation?
That's a good question.
What's the big takeaway?
I think her message is one of hope and empowerment.
Hope and empowerment.
She believes that we can all find balance in this age of indulgence.
But it takes effort.
It does. It requires a conscious effort. It's about making choices that align with our values and long-term well-being. Rather than being ruled by our impulses, those quick dopamine hits that promise pleasure but often lead to pain.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we actually do that in a world that's designed to keep us hooked? It feels like we're fighting an uphill battle sometimes.
It does, doesn't it? We're up against some powerful forces, but Dr. Lembke offers practical strategies for setting boundaries, cultivating mindfulness, and finding healthier sources of pleasure.
Those sound promising.
They are, and we'll dive into those in more detail in the next part of our deep dive.
Can't wait.
But ultimately, it's about creating a life that's rich in meaning and connection.
Instead of
just chasing those fleeting dopamine hits, those empty promises of happiness that never quite deliver.
I love that.
It's a beautiful vision, isn't it?
It is. It's about finding joy in the simple things.
And appreciating the beauty of imperfection instead of always seeking the next big thrill.
Exactly. It's about embracing the journey with all its ups and downs and finding contentment in the present moment.
Beautifully said. That's the heart of it all.
So Dopamine Nation is a call to action.
It is. It's a wake-up call.
It's an invitation to reclaim our agency and create a life that's truly fulfilling. A life that's aligned with our values and our deepest desires.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, that was quite a deep dive into the first part of Dopamine Nation.
We covered a lot of ground.
But we've only just scratched the surface.
There's so much more to explore.
Stay tuned for the next part, where we'll explore Dr. Lembke's practical strategies for finding balance in this dopamine-driven world. We'll unpack the rest of the dopamine framework and dive into some fascinating stories about how real people have used these tools to transform their lives.
Welcome back to Too Lazy to Read,
where we're continuing our deep dive into Dopamine Nation.
That's right.
And figuring out how to thrive in a world overflowing with temptation.
It's not easy, that's for sure.
Last time we left off talking about the challenges of self-care in a world designed for instant gratification.
It's like we're surrounded by junk food for our brains.
And it's so hard to resist.
It is. Those dopamine hits are so alluring.
Exactly. And Dr. Lembke argues that neglecting those basic needs,
the basics like sleep, nutritious food, connection, and meaningful activity,
makes us even more susceptible to those dopamine-driven cravings.
It's a vicious cycle.
We feel bad, so we reach for more pleasure, which makes us feel worse, and so on.
It's like a downward spiral.
Precisely. But the good news is that we can break free from this cycle.
There's hope.
And that's where the second part of Dr. Lembke's book gets really interesting.
She gives us some tools.
She dives into specific strategies for finding balance in our dopamine-driven world.
Practical advice. That's what we need.
And it starts with understanding the power of healthy pain.
Ah, yes. The paradox of pain.
Okay, we touched on this a bit in the last part.
We did.
But remind us, what exactly is healthy pain?
Think about it this way. Have you ever felt that incredible sense of accomplishment after finishing a tough workout?
I do feel good after a workout.
Or the mental clarity that comes after a cold shower?
I'm not a fan of cold showers.
Or the deep satisfaction of completing a challenging project?
Yeah, like when you finally finish that big presentation or paper.
Exactly. Those are all examples of healthy pain.
Activities that might not be enjoyable in the moment.
Right. They require effort and discipline.
But leave you feeling better afterward.
Stronger, more capable, more alive.
So it's about pushing ourselves beyond our comfort zones.
And embracing those experiences that build resilience and character.
Like facing our fears and coming out stronger on the other side.
Exactly. And the surprising thing is that these activities can actually trigger dopamine release too.
Wait, really? Pain can be pleasurable?
It's like our brain is rewarding us for doing something difficult, for pushing ourselves to grow.
That's a mind bender. But I'm starting to see how it all connects.
It's about challenging those ingrained patterns of seeking comfort and avoiding discomfort.
When we challenge ourselves, we're actually strengthening our ability to tolerate discomfort.
Which makes us less likely to seek out those quick dopamine hits.
Because we've already gotten our fix from the healthy pain.
Precisely. We've trained our brains to find satisfaction in different ways.
And Dr. Lembke offers a whole range of strategies for incorporating healthy pain into our lives.
From physical challenges to mental exercises, there's something for everyone.
Okay, spill the beans. What are some of these unconventional approaches to finding balance?
Well, one that's been gaining a lot of attention lately is cold water therapy.
Cold water therapy, you mean like ice baths?
Exactly. Dr. Lemke talks about the benefits of cold showers and even ice baths.
Pff, I'm not sure I'm ready to take the plunge into an ice bath.
It's definitely not for everyone, but even a cold shower can be incredibly invigorating.
I'm willing to try a cold shower. What's the science behind this?
Cold water exposure triggers a cascade of physiological responses. It increases circulation, boosts endorphins, and can even reduce inflammation.
So it's like a shock to the system that wakes you up and helps you reset.
Exactly, and it's not just about the physical benefits. Cold water therapy can also be a powerful tool for building mental resilience.
How so?
When you force yourself to endure something uncomfortable, you're essentially training your brain to tolerate discomfort.
Like building up our tolerance for difficult emotions.
Exactly, which can be incredibly helpful in managing cravings and resisting temptation.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are some other examples of healthy pain we can experiment with?
Well, exercise is a classic one.
Exercise. That's not exactly a new concept.
True, but it's important to remember the power of physical activity in regulating our dopamine levels.
And it doesn't have to be anything extreme.
Not at all. Even a brisk walk or yoga session can do wonders for your physical and mental well-being.
The key is to find something you enjoy and make it a regular part of your routine.
Exactly. Consistency is key when it comes to building healthy habits.
So it's about building those healthy habits that support our overall well-being.
And make us less reliant on those quick dopamine fixes.
Like reaching for our phones or indulging in sugary treats when we're feeling stressed or bored.
Precisely. Those are just temporary solutions that ultimately leave us feeling worse.
And speaking of healthy habits, Dr. Lemke also talks about the power of intermittent fasting.
Ah, yes. Fasting, another ancient practice that's gaining popularity in the modern world.
Okay, fasting. That sounds intense. What's the connection to dopamine?
Intermittent fasting is about strategically restricting your eating window.
So, like only eating during certain hours of the day.
Exactly. For example, you might only eat between the hours of noon and 8 p.m.
And what does that do?
This gives your body a break from constant digestion and can help regulate your blood sugar levels and improve insulin sensitivity.
So it's not about depriving yourself. It's about creating periods of rest and allowing your body to reset.
Precisely. And the interesting thing is that fasting can actually increase dopamine sensitivity, meaning you'll experience more pleasure from food and other activities when you do indulge.
So it's like giving your dopamine receptors a vacation so they come back refreshed and ready to party.
I like that analogy. And it's not just about food. Fasting can also boost mental clarity, focus, and energy levels.
So I might actually feel more energized when I'm fasting.
Many people report feeling sharper and more productive when they practice intermittent fasting.
Okay, I'm definitely curious to try this, but I'm also a bit intimidated by the idea of fasting. Any tips for getting started?
Dr. Lemke recommends starting slowly and gradually increasing your fasting window.
Like starting with a 12-hour fast overnight.
Exactly. Then gradually extend it to 14 or 16 hours. The key is to listen to your body and find a rhythm that works for you.
Makes sense. So we've got cold showers, exercise, and intermittent fasting. All great examples of healthy pain.
They're all about challenging ourselves in different ways and reaping the rewards.
But what about those of us who are really struggling with addiction? Are there more targeted strategies that can help?
Absolutely. Dr. Lemke talks extensively about the importance of therapy, medication, and support groups for those battling addiction.
So it's not just about willpower and self-discipline.
Not at all. Addiction is a complex issue that often requires professional support.
What role does therapy play?
Therapy provides a safe space to explore the underlying causes of addiction, develop coping mechanisms, and build self-awareness.
And medication can help manage cravings and withdrawal symptoms.
Exactly. It can make the recovery process much more manageable.
And support groups like Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous offer a powerful sense of community and accountability.
Yes, they provide a space for people to connect with others who understand their struggles and offer support and encouragement.
So it's about finding the right combination of support and resources to meet your individual needs.
Precisely. There's no shame in seeking help. In fact, it's a sign of strength and courage.
Dr. Lembke emphasizes that recovery is a journey, not a destination.
And it's a journey best taken with the support of others.
That's a powerful message. So we've talked about the power of healthy pain and the importance of seeking help when needed.
Those are two key pillars of Dr. Lemke's approach.
But what about the bigger picture? What role does society play in our collective struggle with dopamine?
That's where Dr. Lemke's book gets really thought-provoking.
In what way?
She argues that we're not just battling our own brains, we're also swimming in a sea of marketing messages and societal pressures that encourage us to overindulge.
It's like we're constantly being bombarded with temptation.
From ads for junk food to social media influencers promoting the latest gadgets, it's hard to escape the message that more is always better.
And this creates a real challenge for our dopamine systems.
We're wired to seek out pleasure and avoid pain, but when we're surrounded by an abundance of easily accessible pleasures.
It's easy to get caught in a cycle of overconsumption.
Exactly. Our brains haven't evolved to handle this level of stimulation.
So what's the solution? How do we create a healthier, more balanced world?
Dr. Lemke suggests a multi-pronged approach. It starts with individual responsibility, making conscious choices about how we manage our own dopamine intake.
So using those strategies we talked about earlier, like incorporating healthy pain, cultivating mindfulness, and seeking support when needed.
Exactly. We have the power to make choices that align with our values and long-term well-being.
But it also involves societal change, right?
Absolutely. We need to start having conversations about the problem, raising awareness, and demanding better from our leaders and from ourselves.
So like what? Regulating the marketing of addictive products, promoting healthier alternatives, creating a culture that values balance and well-being.
All of the above. It's not going to be easy, but it's essential if we want to create a world where we can all thrive, a world where we're not constantly battling our own brains and the relentless pressure to consume.
Well said. But I have a question. Dr. Lemke talks a lot about shame in the book. Isn't that a negative emotion that we should try to avoid?
It can be, but Dr. Lemke makes a fascinating distinction between toxic shame and pro-social shame.
Okay, explain the difference.
Toxic shame is that feeling of being fundamentally flawed or unworthy. It's isolating and paralyzing. But pro-social shame is different.
How so?
It's a feeling of remorse or regret that motivates us to make amends and change our behavior.
So it's like a wake-up call that pushes us in a positive direction.
Exactly. Think about those moments when you've made a mistake and felt a pang of guilt. That guilt can be a powerful motivator to apologize, make things right, and do better next time.
So instead of beating ourselves up with shame, we can use it as fuel for growth.
Precisely, and Dr. Lemke argues that pro-social shame can actually be a powerful tool for healing and recovery.
In what way?
When we share our struggles with others in a safe and supportive environment, it can foster connection, empathy, and accountability.
So it's like taking that shame out of the shadows and turning it into a force for positive change.
Exactly. And that's a key part of creating a healthier relationship with dopamine. It's not about judging ourselves or others for our struggles. It's about understanding the powerful forces at play, developing strategies for managing our impulses, and supporting each other on the path to balance.
This has been such an insightful conversation. I feel like I'm starting to see the world through a whole new lens.
I'm glad to hear that. It's all about expanding our awareness and challenging those ingrained patterns of thinking and behaving.
But before we wrap up, I want to hear more about Dr. Lemke's vision for a dopamine-conscious society.
It's a powerful vision, one that I think we can all aspire to.
What does that look like?
It's a world where we're more aware of the power of dopamine and the ways in which it's being used to manipulate our behavior.
So like being more critical of those marketing messages that are constantly trying to hook us.
Exactly. And it's a world where we're more intentional about our choices, seeking out activities that genuinely nourish us.
Rather than just chasing fleeting pleasures.
It's about prioritizing connection, meaning, and purpose over consumption and instant gratification.
That sounds like a world I want to live in. But how do we get there? It feels like such a daunting task.
It does, doesn't it? But remember, change happens one person at a time.
So if we each focus on making small changes in our own lives.
Exactly. It starts with small steps, having these conversations, making conscious choices, and supporting each other.
It's a collective effort.
It is. And when enough of us start shifting our priorities, the world will follow suit.
Well said. So Dopamine Nation is not just a book about addiction. It's a blueprint for a better future.
A future where we're all more conscious, more connected, and more fulfilled.
I couldn't agree more.
We covered a lot of ground, from healthy pain to the power of community to the vision of a dopamine-conscious society.
We're wrapping up our deep dive into Dopamine Nation today.
And figuring out how to build a life that's truly fulfilling.
In a world that's, well, constantly trying to distract us.
It's been quite a journey, exploring the power of dopamine.
And that pleasure-pain balance, such a powerful concept.
And unpacking Dr. Lemke's dopamine framework.
A set of tools that can really make a difference.
But before we dive into the final takeaways,
Okay.
I want to touch on one more concept from the book that I found really fascinating.
Oh, which one is that?
It's the idea of radical honesty.
Ah, yes, radical honesty. That's a big one.
So tell me more. What exactly is radical honesty?
And how does it relate to our journey in Dopamine Nation?
Right. I'm curious. Well, radical honesty is about being, completely truthful
With ourselves.
with ourselves and others about our struggles with dopamine
So it's about dropping the pretense.
and acknowledging those addictive tendencies that we often, try to hide.
It's like taking off a mask.
Exactly. It's about breaking down the shame and stigma that surround addiction.
And creating a culture of openness and compassion.
That's the goal, to create a space where people feel safe to share their struggles without judgment.
So instead of feeling like we have to pretend we have it all together,
We can actually admit our weaknesses.
and seek support without judgment,
Exactly. And that's where the power of community comes in.
like finding people who understand what we're going through.
Exactly. Dr. Lemke talks a lot about the importance of support groups
man.
like Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, where people can come together and share their stories without fear of judgment.
It's a powerful thing to feel seen and heard without shame.
It is, and it reminds us that we're not alone in this struggle.
We're all navigating this dopamine-saturated world together.
And we can help each other find our way.
So radical honesty is not just about being truthful with ourselves.
It's also about creating a safe space for others to be honest with us,
To create a culture of empathy and understanding.
where people feel comfortable seeking help and supporting each other on the path to recovery.
That's a beautiful vision, and it reminds me of something else Dr. Lemke emphasizes in the book.
What's that?
The importance of finding joy in the simple things.
Ah, yes, the simple things. They're so often overlooked.
In a world that's constantly pushing us towards more.
It's easy to lose sight of the beauty and pleasure that exist in our everyday lives.
So instead of chasing those fleeting dopamine hits from social media, video games, or shopping,
We can cultivate a sense of appreciation for the things that truly matter.
like spending time with loved ones, connecting with nature, or pursuing creative hobbies.
Exactly. Those are the activities that nourish our souls and bring lasting fulfillment.
And they don't require us to spend money, accumulate possessions, or compare ourselves to others.
They're about slowing down, savoring the present moment, and finding joy in the ordinary.
I love that. It's a powerful reminder that happiness doesn't come from external validation or material possessions.
It comes from within, from cultivating a sense of gratitude and contentment.
Absolutely. And that's ultimately what Dopamine Nation is all about.
It's about reclaiming our agency
Making conscious choices.
and creating a life that's aligned with our values.
So let's bring it all together. What are the key takeaways from Dopamine Nation?
That our listeners can start applying in their own lives today.
The things they can walk away with and actually use.
Okay, well, first, it's crucial to understand the power of dopamine and the pleasure-pain balance.
We've talked about that a lot.
Recognizing that our brains are wired to seek out pleasure and avoid pain can help us make more conscious choices.
About how we manage our dopamine intake.
Exactly. We have more control than we think.
Second, we can use the dopamine framework as a guide for finding balance.
A roadmap for navigating this challenging terrain.
Whether it's experimenting with abstinence, cultivating mindfulness, or incorporating healthy pain.
There are practical strategies that can help us break free from those addictive cycles.
Third, we need to prioritize self-care.
Making sure we're getting enough sleep, eating nutritious food, moving our bodies, and connecting with loved ones.
All those things we know we should be doing.
Would often neglect in the hustle and bustle of daily life.
Fourth, we can embrace radical honesty,
Being truthful with ourselves and others about our struggles with dopamine.
which can help us break down shame, foster connection, and create a more supportive environment for healing and growth.
It's about creating a culture of compassion and understanding.
And finally, we can find joy in the simple things.
Shifting our focus from consumption and instant gratification to experiences that nourish our souls and bring lasting fulfillment.
Those are such powerful takeaways, and I hope our listeners feel inspired to put them into practice.
Me too. Remember, change starts with awareness.
We have to see the problem before we can solve it.
Once we understand the forces that shape our behavior, we can start making conscious choices that lead us towards a more balanced and fulfilling life.
Well, that concludes our deep dive into Dopamine Nation,
It's been an incredible journey.
and I'm grateful to have had you along for the ride.
The pleasure was all mine, and I hope our listeners feel empowered to take control of their dopamine.
And create a life that's truly their own. a life that's filled with meaning, purpose, and joy.
That's the dream.
If you're looking for more bite-sized book breakdowns, tips, and tricks for living a more intentional life,
Be sure to subscribe to Too Lazy to Read.
we've got plenty more deep dives coming your way.
We do, we're just getting started.
So until next time, happy reading, happy living, and keep those dopamine levels in check.
See you soon.